Hey, welcome back to Garbro's Field Desk. I have for you Chapter 14 of the Veil Riders Book 4. And you know what? I'm just glad you're here. Like, subscribe, comment down below. Let's go. To say that Valhalla Hill and New Sandrion were not prepared for Yule was an understatement. As soon as Yule and those behind him cleared the bend in the road, the base and now small city lunged into action like a startled grassoline. The news of human refugees brought both of the locales into action, wagons and handcarts coming down the road in legion. Wounded or exhausted humans were quickly picked up and taken away to the healers, while other refugees just took a moment to take a breath. Officials and troopers were dispatched on horseback to see to the fallen humans and other bodies where the veil had been pulled, as the corpses had not been swept back with them. As these humans looked around at the fantastical new city and military base, the relief, awe, and crushing sadness came in waves. A few clapped their hands or danced in the middle of the road, celebrating that they finally made it away from Fey control. Others took off their hats, helmets, or sunglasses and looked around, their eyes wavering with tears as the relief came to them like a monsoon wave approaching shore. Some humans simply wept, kneeling in the road with their hands to the stone as they remembered the hardship of coming to this single point and those who were left behind. The oddest were the humans who stood still, blinking as they tried to come to terms with what was around them. Yule himself ran his hand down his face as a swarm of trucks started coming down the road from Valhalla Hill, and he took a moment to take stock of what all had gone on in such a small amount of time. Weeks upon weeks of travel, being stuck in place by a Fey assault, and a whirlwind couple of days in Chapstow City with Queen Madmirin. Then, in simply the blink of an eye, he was whisked thousands of miles south to the very place where the whole thing had begun. Ryla Jade had coaxed the veil forth, and it spewed out hundreds of humans, dozens of friendly Fey, and enemy Fey warriors fresh from the other side of Earth. Yule felt as if half of the long Scapiran year had already gone by, when he knew it was far, far less. He was tired, his troops were tired, and yet he still had so much work to do. Piper came running down the road after hopping off the side of a truck, looking around with raw shock. "Yule, how in the heavens did you get here?" "I'm not even sure how to explain it," Yule said with an air of exhaustion, the fatigue of the spell wrapping itself around him like a lead weight. "All I'm going to say is Fey bullshit and call it a day." "I see," Piper said in surprise, turning and looking at all the equally tired human refugees. "Where did all of these people come from?" Yule grimaced. "Same Fey. She was able to communicate with the Veil for a short moment and made a doorway for a Fey smuggler. There was a fight. We have wounded, but we were able to overwhelm them quickly." "They were killing refugees?" Piper asked with narrowed eyes. Then he pressed his lips into a grim line as he looked towards many of the refugees that were covered in blood. "Are you really surprised?" Yule asked him, his eyes carrying the same thought that Piper's did. "The chattel was getting out of line and trying to flee the barn." Piper took in a deep breath, then let it out through his nose, taking his patrol cap off his head. "Well, so it may be. How did the meeting go with the Servnians?" Yule looked over his shoulder to Nimi and Alavara, and the sight of the Servnian took Piper by surprise. "Who is she?" Piper asked in honest curiosity, pointing to Nimi. Yule stared at Alavara, who was handing Nimi a canteen, then looked back to Piper. "No one you need to worry about. I have secured a resource that is going to be our key to possibly winning this fucking war." I need to speak to the engineering dwarves, the Oni, and the elves of Reginson. Making a machine? Piper asked him, crossing his arms. Hopefully one to deal with our fuel shortage? Yule shrugged his shoulders. Best I can think of at the moment. You ready for the right way to steampunk? As long as you don't start hot gluing cogs onto our uniforms. Piper laughed, then shook his head before turning around to the massing Veil Rider auxiliaries. Let's get these refugees onto the base. They've had a long journey here, and there's no reason to make it any longer before they get a laydown. With the 3 near-tote months looming and combat looming with it, Yule had very little time to get to work. Gremlin, despite her swollen belly, was as eager as the dwarves and Oni when it came to working with this new mineral, and the engineering began in earnest. Not even the dwarves had any idea such a mineral existed, and were shocked to hear it was mined so far north, let alone by the Servnians. The Servnians themselves were starting to make their presence known in the world, and Yule had heard rumblings of them starting to head south in order to join the war, despite the warnings of their cultural leaders. These Skists, as they were called, were still months away from getting to Valhalla Hill proper, and Yule would deal with them when they arrived. The convoy that brought the stone to Valhalla Hill from Imel Norris was heavily escorted, which garnered many wondering glances as armored vehicles guarded trucks hauling the odd stone, all of them separated and labeled as A and B. Machinists were working around the clock, grinding steel and welding metal together with the new machinery devised by Gremlin, Yule, and Classic. Welding was still being called human magic by the Oni, dwarves, and valley elves that worked with it, only now able to generate the electricity locally needed by the early steam-driven machines. For a long while, only the engineering holds had the power needed to energize the rods. The Oni were the first to actually discover the early aspects of steam power, but found it difficult to keep the heated element fueled enough to make it worthwhile. Together, the dwarves and Oni managed to create a few engines, heated by coal, but were still not efficient enough besides powering bellows, hammers, or weaving machines in small numbers. These new power generators were quickly made via slapdash means, comprised of boilers, mechanisms to control the closing distance of the stone keepers, insulation, condensers, and other machinery that all focused on making these generators produce electricity. Magnets had been easy to find in order to make the simple generators, as lightning spells were rather handy for their creation, as well as the copper wire, but the machines looked like they had been smashed together with little flair or thought. This was actually a field of knowledge Yule had a lot of time spent in learning, and he worked side by side with the dwarves and Oni, as well as any other humans who knew a thing or two about welding, engineering, or machining. A few of the refugees had these skills as well, and every hour of the day was twisted around a single thought, a single need that the Veil Riders required in order to strengthen their position in transporting their goods: steam-powered engines. Of course, this was not a new idea. Steam-powered engines were old news to the humans, but they never had a reason to bother with them when fossil fuel and electric motors were more efficient in the long run. Steam turbines were used all the time, this was true, but they did not scale down well in terms of math. In only a couple days of round-the-clock work, the Veil Riders had their first steam engine ready to test, plugging it into the engine compartment of a battered and heavily modified dingo. All of Valhalla Hill and New Sanrion came down to watch the test. Engineer Prince Focket Elwrench and Yule sitting in the front seats and going over the checklist. Yule was in the passenger seat, murmuring to Focket while Alavara and Nimi watched from a distance, though Makarat stood in front of Alavara in case the damn machine exploded. Water load? Yule asked Focket, running his finger down the list. Full, Focket replied, flexing his fingers. Pull power lever to start, Yule said, rolling his shoulders as he looked to the dwarf beside him. Give the throttle pedal a few pumps to get the water in there. Remember that we have to watch that damned gauge while we're driving too. We weren't able to get the automatic pumps to work in time. Fockett grinned as he reached over to the dash while pumping the pedal, then pulled down on an aircraft-like throttle handle. To be fair, it was borrowed from a spare bin of parts, so as far as anyone knew, it probably was a throttle from an aircraft. The dwarf's eyes lit up as the dials on the dash slowly flickered to life, the engine warming up as the stones closed the distance to produce just enough steam to generate a few horsepower. This in turn allowed a subset of other modules to slowly spin, powered by multiple belt-turn wheels and building electricity. "We got lights?" Yule asked. Fockett nodded. "We have lights." "Thank fuck for that," Yule muttered, looking around at the control panel between them. "I remember when we all nearly panicked just because we forgot to put the belts on. Power transfer box is in neutral and the parking brake is on. Let's take the brake off and put it in direct forward drive. See if this thing will roll under no load on the startup power." "If we even get an inch or two, it's going to take a lot of weight off of me," Fockett said, reaching down and grabbing the parking brake handle. "This science is only a few days old. If we can manage this, we'll be unstoppable." "Temper expectations," Yule said quietly, and despite himself, his heart was hammering in his chest, his nerves raw. "Pull it." The parking brake came off with a loud metallic ka-thunk, and the little dingo slowly rolled forward a few inches before Fockett applied the brake. Yule and Fockett looked at each other, their smiles growing on their faces while everyone behind them started to cheer and scream.
"It works!"
Willie screamed, having put in his fair share of time during the manic testing period.
"Holy shit, it works!"
Classic was slamming his palms together, grinning from ear to ear as he watched Fockett let go of the brake and stop a few times to prove it wasn't just a one-time fluke.
I'll be fucked. If we can get a steam turbine in the big trucks, they'll be able to haul the same weight as trains. You can see the excess steam puffing out of the pressure valve to help the engine slow. It's working perfectly.
A nearby tired dwarven engineer let out a happy sigh, taking off his gloves.
"She's not a bad little machine for such a short amount of time. With enough energy and proper parts, it can really make something happen."
"Take me somewhere nice," Yule said to Fockett, tossing the checklist into the glove box of the retrofitted dingo. Fockett chuckled happily, then let off the brake. The dingo rolled forward a little faster as Fockett slowly turned the inner wheel and set to the main steering wheel, which in turn opened a screw valve that controlled how much steam was entering the driving pistons. This worked more or less the same as a regular fuel throttle, except instead of allowing more fuel into the injectors, it just allowed more steam to pass through the pistons. It was simple enough, but with enough tinkering it could be nearly as efficient as a regular fuel engine. The only true difference was how the two engines worked. Fuel engines had a lot more on-demand power, instantly accelerating upwards as more fuel was dumped into it. Steam engines took a little more time to spool up, and was perhaps the most important key difference between the two. There were also more gauges to follow for the ramshackle test steam engine. If you wanted to go faster, you needed more steam, and the drive became very interactive. The power lever on the dash controlled how close the two minerals were in order to create heat. The faster you wanted to go, or the more power you needed, the more steam you needed to produce. It led to a lovely movement of hands as you drove, a dance of fingers as the lever was moved up and down depending on how much steam was needed, the turning of the inner wheel for the throttle, and a gentle pumping of the floor pedal when water was running low in order to build said pressure. Jiggering the inner wheel was great fun to Fockett. While it was not the same as pressing down on a gas pedal and slamming around gears, it elicited the same expert balance within his soul. To Fockett, it acted a lot more like piloting than driving, and it was deeply satisfying to hit the symmetry the vehicle needed. Both Yule and Fockett knew that the steam-powered engines could be called anything but compact, quick, or small for that matter. But they were at least easy to replace parts within and held a grand amount of torque, so that was something. Yule startled when an overpressure valve opened, turning to look down at the side of the dingo as excess steam hissed out in a long puff of white fog. Overpressure valve works, but we lose water when we do that, Yule said, though he didn't have to yell, even though the windows were down. The vehicle, well, it was dead silent compared to a regular engine. Fockett clicked his teeth. It's a little tricky maintaining the right pressure. I keep adding too much heat, but not using enough of it in the throttle. Let's try and do an emergency stop, Yule said as he looked at the speed dial, spying that the little dingo was hitting 25 stelfooms per hour. Leave the heat controls alone. Inner wheel, full left, full brake. Fockett flicked his thick right thumb upwards, spinning the inner wheel until it caught in the full stop catch, and pressing hard on the brake with his boot. The dingo came into a wheel-screeching skid on the stone-paved road, both Yule and Fockett bracing themselves as the vehicle came to a shuddering halt. As designed, the overpressure valve gave a great hiss, venting all the unneeded steam as a safety gauge snapped the throttle handle up to the start position. Yule gave a coughing chuckle, turning to look at the dash. Well, damn, that worked a treat. The stones stayed in their starting positions as well. We didn't lose electrical power, Fockett said with a satisfied nod, then clapped his hands together. Blessed gods of the mountains, it actually works. Yule put the dingo into neutral to avoid overstressing the rush job parts. How does it feel power-wise? Feels like the hand of Fulgrim is pushing us along the road. It's smooth, Fockett said with a happy sigh, then patted his massive hands on the steering wheel. I like this. Would you like a try? Sure, Yule said with a laugh, and they both opened the doors, taking the moment to do a walk around of the vehicle and make sure nothing was rattling off. Yule got in, adjusting the bench seat so he could actually fit his legs, then ran through the checklist. He took a moment to make sure the rear drive function worked, then put it back into forward drive. Yule was curious of another thing, much akin to how some humans would hold down the brake and gas pedals to cause a peeling of wheels, and he tried it with the steam engine. To his surprise, the engine overpowered the brakes after some testing with the throttle wheel, and he found that quite curious. Avoiding the stressing of the parts again, he decided to stop this testing and instead set back off at a normal drive. The eerie quiet of the vehicle really caught him off guard. The only sounds that came to him was the rushing of wind through the open windows, the sounds of the wheels on the stone road, and the light rattle of the suspension. It was peaceful, and Yule could see himself really enjoying this. It was also nice just having to use the inner wheel as a throttle, leaving him to do whatever he liked with his legs. Looks like the condenser's working. We're keeping most of the water. Do you think we could manage to create some kind of void chamber? Catch all the excess steam and turn it back into water? Yule asked a dwarf beside him, who was holding his hand out the window and catching the wind on his palm. Fockett grunted. Maybe possible. However, you could also just chuck a few cans of water in the trunk when you needed it. True, Yule murmured, using the thumb of his hand to manage the inner wheel as his other hand reached out the window, waving to the quickly approaching crowd that cheered when they saw him. The vehicle was so quiet that he could actually hear them cheer, and he mentally made a note to see if scout vehicles could make use of this steam engine. After all, he had just put in an order for a whole mess of those brooms he saw outside Chapstow, and this could make a good option for supply runs out on special operations missions. Yule slowly turned the wheel to kill the throttle, the excess steam venting as he brought the dingo into a gentle brake before Alavara at Mackerad, and curiously enough, Nimmy as well. You ladies fancy a drive? Yule asked them, giving the horn a few quick beeps. Alavara giggled and quickly slipped into the vehicle, crawling in through the window over Fockett and eliciting a bark of outrage from the dwarf. Mackerad and Nimmy instead got into the back seat, though Nimmy was apprehensive, this being the first time she had ever been in one of these vehicles. She did not like them much, the growling engines and noise causing her heart rate to spike in fear. Nimmy was still feeling the shame of having to be coaxed out from under a deck, having been startled by a scout car thundering past on the road while she was out buying food for Yule's home.
This is different.
Mackey said with a smile, looking past Alavara's shoulder at the front dash.
Why is there a second wheel? Is that for smaller turns?
Fockett rolled his eyes at the question, scooting as far towards the door as the seat would allow due to Alavara sitting in between him and Yule. That's our throttle, Yule said with a short laugh. You were taught on fuel-driven engines. Alavara nodded, but pointed to the dash.
The trucks don't have a handle like that, though.
That's what we use to create steam, Fockett said, holding out his hands with elbows close to his sides to avoid touching Alavara's own. Stones get close and create a lot of heat. Water is pumped in to create steam. Yule slowly twisted the inner wheel, raising an eyebrow as he felt the breath of Nimmy near his cheek and assumed she was looking over his other shoulder. This wheel releases the steam towards the pistons, and is, in fact, our gas pedal. The one on the floor just pumps in water for now. The dingo slowly crawled forward as Yule turned the wheel, eliciting a few oohs and ahs from Alavara and Mackey.
It is of being very quiet.
Nimmy murmured next to Yule's ear, and he had to fight to not jerk his head away from her. He still didn't mind her, but she was a bundle of twine he didn't feel like unraveling yet, if ever.
It is not of being as loud as the combat vehicles.
Yule nodded. This is true. At the starting level of the throttle, we just crawl along like this, as there isn't enough pressure behind the steam. As he pulled down slightly on the throttle, the gauges reacted with a few twitches, and the pressure gauge began to climb along with the temperature gauge. Now we can slowly twist this inner wheel to gain more speed, allowing more of the pressurized steam towards the pistons, Yule said, his thumb slowly dragging down on the wheel to turn it while pumping a little more water where it needed to go. The dingo slowly began to speed up, and it was Nimmy this time who gave a short
Oh.
of surprise.
We are moving quite quickly.
Nimmy said in excitement, then poked her head out the window.
Yet it is of being so quiet. It is absurdly quiet.
Mackey mused, leaning back against the seat as Yule slowly drove the dingo through New Sandrion.
The trucks and tanks are deafeningly loud. Look, it's not even scaring the cart horses.
Alavara leaned forward to watch the beasts, and the horses did not even seem to spook in the slightest, only watching the machine go by.
Very quiet, very calm. This is actually going to be a boon for the town if you think about it. The noise is not going to be nearly so loud.
Is it safe, though?
Mackey asked as she leaned her head to the side, listening to the soft thrumming of the pistons.
What if the pressure gets too high? Even brewing kettles can explode if too much steam is produced.
Fockett chucked his teeth. There are safety valves, lass. Here, watch. The dwarf pulled the throttle all the way down to produce too much steam, and after a few moments of not being used for speed, the emergency valve gave a great hissing cloud of vapor. This burst of steam naturally caused Nimmy to startle across the seat and cling to Mackey, her short Serbian ears perked and alert.
I'm not taking care of them both.
Mackey said dourly to the back of Yule's head, eyes half lidded as Nimmy bared her fangs at her window.
Not without a pay raise. Get off me, fur woman!
And it just creates steam.
Alavara mused, ignoring the struggle in the back seat and sniffing lightly.
I detect a slight scent of lubrication oils, but it is not nearly as bad as the fumes from a regular engine exhaust.
Yule used his free hand to pat the thigh of her uniform pants, noting that they were oddly a little tighter around the waist than usual. It won't power a helicopter or a tank, but it will definitely power a truck. With these, we can save our fuel for our war vehicles. Officially, this world has now entered the diesel steam age and the Confederation is at its head.
These will sell for a mint.
Mackey said gleefully, rubbing her hands together even as Nimmy still clung to her.
Every noble and merchant is going to want a truck like this to haul goods or parade themselves around town. My gods, the guilders will be flowing like a golden river.
Alavara smiled softly, placing her hand over Yule's.
I'm sure the wealth will be shared as it always has been.
It will, Yule confirmed, lifting her hand to his lips and giving it a soft kiss. Everyone gets a share of this pie, and we'll all be better for it. Alavara's eyebrow twitched as she detected a thought from Nimi, and she turned her head quickly enough to catch the Serbian looking longingly at Yule kissing Alavara's hand. Nimi quickly looked away, instead acting as if she was paying attention to something outside the window. Yule drove them around for a bit, just enjoying how calm it was and showing both Alavara, Mackerat, and Nimi how to operate it, all the way down to breaking and starting it up from cold. After an hour of driving around, Yule put the engine through its paces going up and down the elevations of Valhalla Hill, but never found the engine wanting in terms of torque. He parked the vehicle at the bay in which it was created, and those who had put their blood and sweat into the hasty prototype shared a short celebration with many hands slapping shoulders and ale cans being cracked. Yule, slipping away to see to other business, turned to Alavara. I have to go check in on this gaggle of humans. Go ahead and head back on over to the house. It shouldn't be too long, Yule said, giving her a kiss on the cheek. Alavara jerked Yule's head around, giving him a proper kiss on the lips before smacking the bill of his patrol cap down.
Are you going to want tea?
Yule laughed, pulling his hat back up. Yeah, tea sounds good. I'm also feeling like stew.
We had stew yesterday,
Mackerat grumbled.
You're the boss of this place. Can't you ask your kitchen to serve you a nice braised meat for once? Roasted vegetables, stewed grains, a nice soft roll with butter.
Yule placed his hand on her own patrol cap and mashed it down onto her head, messing up her hair as she yowled. I want stew, so we're having stew.
Fine.
Mackerat barked out, fixing her patrol cap back into place and sweeping her hair out of her face.
But can we at least have something different tomorrow?
I'll think about it, Yule said, then winked to Alavara as the elf smiled at him.
Come on, Mackerat. I bet I can convince that Yamatu to make some biscuits for you at least.
Alavara said, setting off at a walk while the Brim Touch ambled after her. Yule watched Alavara walk away, more for the fact he liked watching her walk away from him when the light hit her pants right. After a few seconds of watching the bounce of her steps, he turned to go about his own way towards the command building. He came to a quick stop after only a few paces, seeing that little-eared Nimi was standing in front of him. Yes? Yule asked her, a cheer from the vehicle bay going up as someone inside released the pressure valve. Nimi's fingertips pressed against each other, while some laced awkwardly.
Can I have, joining you?
You want to come watch me talk to people? Yule asked her, though this was out of genuine curiosity. Since they had gotten back, the Serbian was like a shadow in his house, constantly following him around and observing him. Nimi shrugged her shoulders, looking down at her hands.
I suppose. Spend time with you?
Ah, Yule thought to himself, putting his hands in his pockets. Alavara wasn't here and neither was Yethis, and the Serbian finally had a moment of one-on-one time. Yule stood there for a long minute, looking down at the Serbian as she fiddled with her fingers, as well as making sure her shawl was wound around her face as per usual. Yule didn't like the fact she wore that thing. For one, she wasn't ugly. She was bestial in some of the same ways as the gnolls, sure, but she was far from what anyone could call ugly. Frankly, Yule couldn't understand why her father found it hard to marry her off. She was cute as a button as far as he was concerned, and had more than enough of the womanly shapes men tended to like looking at. But the real issue at the forefront of his mind was that he wasn't really into polygamy, of all things. You can come with me, Yule said, taking a few strides up so he stood beside the Serbian woman. But you have to show your face. Nimi's amber eyes filled with fear as she looked up at Yule, and she clutched at her shawl instinctively.
Showing of my face?
Yule noted that she was still wearing a Serbian top, which to him resembled an extremely billowy Jacobite shirt, but was wearing a pair of uniform bottoms in order to match Alavara, despite her bare, animalistic feet. Yes, showing of your face. If you're going to be attached to me, you're going to have to exude confidence, Yule said gently, then lightly tugged down her shawl so that it gathered below her chin. That should do for now. Nimmy looked extremely embarrassed, her face becoming quite hot as Yule observed her, but she nodded her face a few times, folding her large hands in front of her belt buckle.
Oh, okay.
Yule narrowed an eye at her, then took off at a walk. Come along now, humans to see. Nimmy quickly stepped along the ground until she came beside Yule, though she was walking on his left. She kept her hands crossed in front of her belt as they walked, and Yule kept hearing an odd swishing noise as they made their way through the base. He finally figured out what it was when he saw that Nimmy was wagging her short Serbian tail rather rapidly, though he didn't make a fuss about it. By the time they arrived at the refugee holding area, set up a long time ago for the orc renegades and displaced southern elves, Nimmy was actually smiling and had her rather large ears out of her shawl.
Yule! About time you...
Chick started, but stopped mid-step, boot in the air when she saw Nimmy walking on the left side of Yule.
Oh, well, hello there.
Nimmy bowed forward in respect to Chicks, then leaned back up, her smile still fixed on her face.
You dog.
Chicks hissed to Yule in English, slapping him on the shoulder before turning around. Yule's face soured as he started walking after Chicks, pulling his hands from his pockets. She was just walking with me.
Uh-huh.
Chicks mused, twirling her finger in her long blonde hair dreamily.
It always starts with walks.
Nimmy looked confused, her head tilted and eyebrows raised as she walked after them both, her ears perking when Yule grabbed Chicks by the ear and made her howl in pain with a pinch.
I hear Yule's arrived.
Cole said with a chuckle as he, Domino, Kentucky, the heavily pregnant gremlin, Donahue, and Wulf walked out of a meeting room. They all, however, came to a stop when they saw Nimmy walking down the hallway, and they all looked to each other.
Oh!
Gremlin said with a bright smile, walking as fast as she could towards Nimmy.
A Serbnian! You know, we all thought you were going to look like Leams. A Leam?
Nimmy said, narrowing her eyebrows.
Why of a Leam?
Donahue rolled his eyes. It's a thing from Earth. Don't worry about it, Nimmy.
You're all of knowing my name?
Nimmy asked in surprise.
I have not been of meeting any of you.
Kentucky laughed.
Oh, trust me, fair girl. Everyone knows who you are.
All good things. Don't worry.
Wulf said with a wink to Nimmy, then motioned for them all to keep walking down the hallway.
Let's go see the other humans. They're waiting for Yule this whole time anyway.
Nimmy was still confused as she took back up her position at the left of Yule, the small group of humans walking down another hallway and coming out into a large recreational area. Nimmy couldn't help but stare in wide-eyed fascination at so many humans being in one place at one time, though they were all currently paying close attention to an older blue Oni man teaching them the Tunka language. The Oni saw Yule, then clapped his hands together 3 times.
We'll have to pause here. It appears Yule has arrived.
Hundreds of faces looked towards Yule and also at Nimmy, causing the Serbian to wilt under all those eyes, her ears pinning down against her head. Good evening, Yule said in English, tilting his head to the many humans in front of him, as well as buenas noches. I am Yule, and I will be doing my best to see that all of you find a place you want to be in on this side of the world. However, I would first like to ask if any of you would be militarily inclined volunteers. There would be some military volunteers joining the Veil Rider Lone Wanderers. Just under 70 of the survivors taking up rifle and bayonet, but Yule was fine with that. There were hundreds left over, but none of them were soldiers. The next day, Yule was up early, walking down to the refugee building with Nimmy once again in tow. Alavara was tasked by Yule to go and prowl along the new human recruits and see if they were planted there, or if any of them meant ill will, and Macknight, of course, went with her. Nimmy had another span of time with Yule by herself, and her tail did not stop wagging the entire way to the refugee layover building. It took a little more coaxing, but this time her shawl was worn around her neck and shoulders, exposing her entire head to the morning sun and letting it warm her purple and gray fur. An additional treat was sitting next to Yule in the interview office, and she took great pleasure in getting tea for Yule when his cup ran low. Around noon, Nimmy ran out for another pot of tea from the kitchens, and the kindly, rather fetching Argentinian woman smiled at her as she left.
She seems nice.
She said to Yule when the door shut behind Nimmy.
Your wife?
Yule snorted. It's complicated.
Complicated.
She mused, giving him raised eyebrows and speaking in that famous South American drama drawl.
I see. Is it because of all of the fur?
Yule closed his eyes, then opened them to stare across his desk at the woman. No, it is not because of all the fur. Now, can you tell me about what you did on Earth, Aldana?
I was a dancer.
Aldana said proudly, crossing her legs and dusting off her borrowed Veil Rider uniform bottoms.
Things were quite bad over on the other side, and I still needed to make money. The Fae paid well. They were just as crude as we humans were. They were, however, more cruel in the kinds of pleasure they took.
Yule blinked at her in confusion, his pen coming to a pause on the pad of fresh paper. You were a dancer? Like, exotic?
Sure.
Aldana said with a snicker, then her face started to darken as her voice began to lose its cheery pitch.
It was easier to do. After what happened to my family.
Yule set his pen down, leaning back in his chair. We don't have to talk about it.
It is fine.
Aldana muttered, running her fingers through her long black hair.
My husband and kids were visiting his family in Paraguay. I stayed behind because, believe it or not, this body has the mind of an engineer inside of it, and we were a bit behind on work. The Fae came out. They got cut off in Paraguay, and then the jungle came alive.
Yule pressed his lips into a line, cringe burning icily within his chest as he heard the news and had an inkling the goddess may have been passing by at that exact moment. They didn't make it.
No.
Aldana said, her smile sad as she shook her head.
They were taken by the jungle, as were millions of others. Then the engineering firm was shut down by the Fae. I was out of work, prices were skyrocketing for food, and I had to get by.
Yule ran his hand down his beard, then cleared his throat as Nimmy walked back in with a pot of tea and 3 mugs. What was your degree in?
Civil and structural engineering.
Aldana said proudly, nodding in thanks to Nimmy as the Serbian handed her a steaming cup of tea.
Thank you, cariño peludo.
Nimmy, knowing neither English nor Spanish, looked awkwardly towards Yule and just nodded back to the tanned human. You possess 2 engineering degrees and had to work a pole? Yule muttered angrily, then turning and speaking to Nimmy briefly in Tunka as the Serbian asked what the woman had said to her. Aldana shrugged a shoulder.
You do what you have to in order to afford bread.
Well, rest assured, we have far more use for you as an engineer than a pole dancer, despite what you may hear. Yule said, quickly writing down on the pad of paper. I know the Oni, Brimtouch, and Dwarves will be delighted to hear they have much to learn from you. Aldana, taking a long drink from her cup as Yule spoke, set it down excitedly on the desktop.
Do you mean it?
Of course. We need all the engineers we can get. Yule said with a chuckle, writing down a few names on a piece of paper. I won't make you deal with Fockett, but you can go speak with Breeny. She's the yellow Oni with a very short spike over in the engineering building. I'm sure she'll have plenty to talk your ear off about. However, as you don't know Tunka yet, stop by Supply. They can get you issued a temporary translation necklace. They don't work super great, but it's better than nothing. Aldana brought her hands together with a sharp clap.
Oh, I hope I haven't forgotten too much. I notice a lot of the buildings around here look a little wonky, and I doubt they have a proper sewer system. Do you guys have a concrete?
Breeny can bring you up to speed. Yule chuckled, as well as find you a place to live. There are plenty of empty rooms in New Sandrion. If you have any questions, all humans have direct access to the base as long as you keep all your passes on you. Aldana reached into her pocket and pulled out a smaller leather booklet.
Yes, my little interdimensional passport. I'll be sure to keep an eye on it.
Aldana left to see about her new future, and a pale, rangy-looking man was next to enter, though he nearly startled back out the door when he saw Nimmy.
Good God! Is that a talking badger?
He yelled out in English, then poked his head inside to stare wide-eyed at Nimmy, who had launched herself across the room behind Yule's chair, startled by the loud outburst. Yule, despite all this, raised his eyebrows at the man. I'm going to say Kentucky.
West Virginia.
The man growled past the door frame, keeping his eyes locked on Nimmy.
Does that thing have to be in here?
Yule slowly brought his shoulders back, cracking them in his spine as he picked up his pen. I would advise you to stop causing a scene and scaring my helper. The human took a deep breath in, then slowly stepped into the room, pulling out the chair in front of Yule's desk.
Right, that was rude of me. Don't get me wrong, now that I'm looking at her, she's quite adorable. It was just, surprising.
Yule quietly translated what he said to Nimmy, and she perked up a little. He then turned to the human. Moving along, what did you do on Earth, Marcus?
Master pipe welder and driller.
Marcus said, his eyes flicking from Nimmy to Yule.
Why is her fur purple?
Why is your hair red? Yule asked him flatly, writing down on the pad. Her hair is purple because it's purple. My beard is long because it is. You're asking questions of things we cannot answer. As for welding, do you want to do it here? At this question, Marcus perked up himself.
There's welding here. I thought it'd be horses and armor and throwing fireballs and shit.
We have welders, Yule said.
What kind?
Marcus asked, leaning forward in his seat.
TIG, MIG, flux core, stick, high frequency?
Yule took a fresh cup of tea from Nimmy and told her in Tunka to not give Marcus one. He then turned to the human. Stick, for now.
Because it's the most simple,
Marcus said, nodding his head.
All you need is the rod of metal and the flux code in it to create shielding. I suppose you may be using cast iron or steel for the rod itself.
Sure, Yule replied, as he had no idea what the guy was even talking about. Classic had dealt with all of that, and Yule just knew how to use the damn things.
I don't like stick, but I can show those short fellows how to draw a better bead,
Marcus said, standing up and dusting off his own pair of borrowed uniform bottoms.
Where do I need to go?
Yule gave the man a look, but wrote down a few names on a piece of paper. Head over to the mechanical bays, ask for Renil. He's a
Got it,
Marcus said, snatching the paper out of Yule's hands and getting up from his chair.
Let's go make some shit to kill Faye.
Yule sat there, hands still halfway outstretched as Marcus nearly flew past a door, running down the hallway with heavy bootfalls.
I was not of liking him.
Nimmy said, her ears pinned back angrily as she still stood behind Yule's chair. I was not of liking him either, Yule grumbled, but tried to master his face as the next human came walking down the hallway. After that particular human, the rest flowed by quite easily, and Nimmy was able to enjoy nearly 4 hours of time with Yule without interruptions. With the other Veil Rider Sergeant Majors working in concert with Yule and applying military efficiency, every human had a place to be and a job to do, either on Valhalla Hill or over in New Sandrion. Yule cracked his fingers and gave them a shake, never having been a fan of paperwork, and looked over to Nimmy. You hungry?
It is of my turn to cook tonight.
Nimmy said from beside Yule, having gotten herself a chair, and was still glowing from the few times her outer thigh had touched Yule's while they worked.
I am of making prindi.
Prindy? Yule asked, shuffling his papers together in order to hand them to the record workers at the end of the hall. Nimmy nodded, her tail wagging behind her at the thought of Yule eating some of her race's cooking.
Brown bread with sausage of blood and grain, eaten together with mushrooms bathed in butter.
Sounds interesting, Yule said politely, wondering if she was talking about some cousin to black pudding. Either way, let's get out of here. Yule's voice faded away as he heard boots coming down the hall, and he turned his head towards the door with a tilt. I thought you said everyone got ran through.
I did not say that.
Nimmy said, also tilting her head. Down the hallway, the thud of boots grew, as well as the soft click of talons. Yule leaned back in his chair, folding his arms as he waited for what new round of bullshit was about to meet him that day. A raven harpy wearing a mixture of a Veil Rider uniform and other pieces of clothing came into view first, standing in the doorway and bowing forwards towards Yule.
Commander.
Yule nodded, narrowing his eyes at the raven harpy's uniform rank. What do you need, Sergeant Duke?
I come at the request of Moal Moira under passage from the autodidact.
The raven harpy said, then stepped to the side of the doorway, a figure wearing an obscuring traveling cloak stepping into view. The name summoned a fierce burning cold within his chest, as if the name alone was enough to summon Crinja straight to him on contact. Yule rolled a shoulder as he stared at the robed figure, his voice low as he responded to Duke. Black Bishop. That means you're the fae they found underground, the Queen's right hand. The robed figure slowly pulled her hood back, and to Yule's surprise, she was smiling through a curtain of white hair, lilac speckled eyes bright.
You know me?
I know you are a long way from where you should be, Yule said, his jaw setting as he felt Crinja settle inside of him. Mal Moira stepped forward into the room, and Duke came in after her, shutting the door and standing in front of it.
I may be whatever I am now, but I am still fae. So I know how to get around quickly when I need to. It is why Duke is here with me and my good friend Hans is not. Duke is quite fast in flight.
I have been learning quite a lot about how you fae get around, Yule said shortly, then turned a hand palm up as he gestured towards the chair. Have a seat. I can only assume the charge of the remnants wishes to speak to me. Mal Moira politely sat in the chair, arranging herself and pulling her long white hair over her shoulders as she looked at Nimmy.
My goodness, a Serbnian! I believe the last time I saw one of you was during the war.
Nimmy let out a nervous, civil chuckle as she scooted a little closer to Yule, more for protection from whoever this person was. Nimmy was many things, and while she could not find minerals with her nose very well, she was quite good at reading a room. Yule eyed the woman as she turned around and spoke to Duke the Raven Harpy, and he was having trouble connecting the woman with her deeds. The right hand of the Queen, the Fae General who brought low Crinja by dueling her and delaying her from defending her holy city, the Fae General who slew men and women with ireful disgust in the hundreds. Was this woman? She was Fae, and of course Fae were beautiful by design, but she seemed so soft, so bereft of violence as she gave the harpy a quick rustle of the hair with her hand. He was also catching on that these higher fae had normal eyes, unlike the lesser fae with their fully black eyes. Bruda had regular eyes, Acklaman had regular eyes, Ramella had regular eyes. Was it another level of the fae's caste system? Mal Moira was just as different, if even more due to her own status. She had the look of a new bride starting out her journey through motherhood, not a god-dueling warrior.
I am seeking refuge.
Mal Moira said bluntly, holding her hands in her lap.
I have a new mission, and I need time to find out what it is. While you may know me as a fae,
The memory of what Crinja and Finitri said to Yule came to his mind with vivid clarity, and he spoke out, cutting the fae off. Are a god now. Mal Moira blushed, something that both Yule and Nimmy found ridiculous, and she nodded a few times.
I believe that may be accurate. What I am a god of, I do not know, but I believe that I will be safe here. I would have the time to figure out what it is that I am to do, but I also know you are a champion of Crinja. Duke was fretting the entire way here about what you may do when you saw me.
The other gods have told Crinja to cool her heels about you, Yule said bluntly, and he leaned forward in his chair. And I have come into possession of more fae, Fae that have come in from the other side of the veil as refugees. A part of me says to send you on your way, as I am already worn to the quick with you sneaky, quickly moving Fae and your ability to just pop up under my goddamn nose. Mal Moira's smile faltered, her eyebrows coming down from their joyful arc as she turned to look at Duke.
I suppose we were right in leaving Boyard to hold those rooms for us in short.
Yule felt the inner cold of Crinja within his chest give a leap of guilty pleasure at seeing Mal Moira's smile falter, but the words of Finitri hit them both at the same time, and Yule rolled his eyes as he gave out a sigh. I suppose. Mal Moira's face snapped around to Yule, and she leaned forward in her chair.
Yes?
Yule grimaced to the point it was almost a snarl, and he felt Crinja nearly doing the same thing in his mind. I suppose you can stay in New Sandrion.
I can?
Mal Moira cried out, coming up onto her boots and setting her hands on the desktop.
Do you promise?
Yule stood up as well, jabbing a finger at the Fae. If you keep your activity down to a minimum, I don't want to see any new temples or churches in town, and you can't go running around telling everyone who you are. Romella may be able to get away with it, but something tells me that people at the Temple of Crinja may try and use you as an offering.
Rommel?
Mal Moira said with a tilt of the head, then realization came to her eyes.
Romella is here? My gosh, she used to serve under me. I haven't seen her since,
I get it, Yule said, holding up his hands. But I mean it. You keep yourself under wraps. Don't go throwing your name around. Mal Moira nodded her head up and down to Yule's words, then turned, taking Duke's wing claws in her hands as she started hopping up and down.
We get to stay!
Bishop said Yule would let us.
Duke said in confusion, but the smile grew from under his sheet of black hair.
Should I go and fetch Boyard?
Yes! Go and get the centaur! But make sure he remembers what Castle told him!
Mal Moira said cheerfully, then turned to Yule with her hands clasped in front of her.
I appreciate your generosity, Mr. Yule. Clearly the rumors about you were not true in the least.
Yule forced a smile, and Nimmy seemed to be doing the same, as it appeared she was not supposed to like this woman from how Yule was behaving. Don't count them out yet, Mal. Yule growled out, then opened a drawer to the desk. I'll get you a room for you and your staff. And that is the end of Chapter 14 of the Veil Riders Book 4. If you like this story and others like them, be sure to like and subscribe to the channel of Garbro's Field Desk. Share this story around to those who you think would also enjoy this story written by an amateur and a mudmouth. Join us on the Discord, join us on X, join us on our streams on Twitch, and of course join us on Ko-fi if you want to be a member. Members get sneak peeks at chapters, at art that's currently being work in progress, little sneak peeks, and your own special channel in the Discord. For $50 per month, the first shirts bear this channel upon them shoulders and keep us going smoothly and running in general. It's going to be Charles White, Optimus Primus, Some Dude, Allspark, E Machino, Cody Jarrow, Death's Dancer, and Insane Medic. Then there's our E4 Mafia. These guys give $25 per month. That's the Great Baguette, Sonic Arrow, Splug the Goblin, Dockside, Kiwi Bastard, Lacune 8, Lacune, Josh Beatty, Matty Boy, and Crusader 0625. And then there's our Snuffy Squad. That's Demi McCowan, Super Stink 64, Eldorod, Crowman, Dalek, Jules, Blonde Lord, Thrace Vega, Devin, Sean, Holtz, Andrew, and Gil, Yeti Potato, Skelters, Kite Zero, Classic Cthulhu, Ranger Uninspired, Diesel Dog, Coffee Commander, Anto, Inquisitor Matt, Duncan D, and Ein, the Lore Smith. These guys give $5 per month. And until we see you next time on this side of the veil, that was Franners, our spell checker / Garbro slapper. That was Technoward. That was Simba. That was Hailey. That was Rue Ryder. And this is Garbro's Field Desk. We'll see you next time. Bye-bye.